why this tension is unavoidable right now, and most importantly, how this fracturing might impact your finances, your job security, and the future prosperity of the countries we live in. So let's start with the central thesis articulated at Davos. The era of globalization, as we knew it, is over. For the last 3 decades, economic integration was the default setting. Companies sourced components globally, supply chains stretched across oceans, and political stability, while imperfect, was assumed enough to allow for massive capital flows. Now that assumption is gone. Leaders are talking about de-risking, friendshoring, and outright decoupling. It means companies are facing immense pressure, often from governments, to choose sides. Take technology, for example. The battle for supremacy in AI, semiconductors, and quantum computing is intensifying. Countries are moving to protect their strategic technological advantages, which translates directly into export controls, restrictions on foreign investment, and state subsidies aimed at creating purely domestic champions. For a company like NVIDIA, or ASML, this means navigating an increasingly complex web of regulations that dictates who they can sell their most advanced equipment to, dramatically impacting their potential market size and, ultimately, profit margins. The economic costs of this political rivalry are already measurable. The World Trade Organization has warned that trade fragmentation could reduce global GDP by up to 5% in the long run. To put that in perspective, 5% of global GDP is trillions of dollars. Money that could otherwise be used for infrastructure, healthcare, or combating climate change. This isn't just theory. We're seeing it in real time through persistent inflation. When companies are forced to pull supply chains out of efficient, low-cost regions and move them to higher-cost domestic or friendly areas, those added expenses inevitably get passed down to consumers. We are paying the political premium every time we buy a consumer good. One of the most worrying signals coming out of the conference was the shift in corporate mindset. Previously, CEOs were primarily focused on shareholder value and quarterly returns. Now, they are forced to spend significant resources on geopolitical risk management. They are hiring political analysts, dedicating entire teams to compliance with sanctions, and mapping out multiple worst-case scenarios, from regional conflicts to full-scale trade isolation. This diversion of resources is inherently unproductive. It shifts capital away from innovation and growth and into risk mitigation, slowing down the pace of global economic advancement. The discussions around the Russia-Ukraine conflict were, of course, central to this theme. The comprehensive sanctions imposed on Russia demonstrated the sheer power that coordinated economic action can have. But they also highlighted vulnerabilities. They accelerated the move by countries, particularly those in the global south, to find alternatives to the US dollar for trade and finance. And while the dollar's dominance is not immediately threatened, the long-term trend toward multipolarity in finance is undeniable. If enough major trading blocs decide to settle transactions in different currencies, the Chinese yuan, the Indian rupee, or even a digital currency, the effectiveness of future financial sanctions will diminish, making great power conflicts potentially more difficult to manage peacefully. The issue isn't just the overt conflicts, but the breakdown of multilateral institutions designed to stabilize the global system. Organizations like the WTO, the World Health Organization, and even the UN Security Council are struggling to function effectively because of the deep mistrust and strategic maneuvering between the major powers. When the rules-based order breaks down, economic decisions become politicized, transactional, and far less predictable. This lack of predictability is poison for long-term business investment. Why commit billions of dollars to a new factory overseas if a sudden diplomatic spat could lead to its nationalization or the freezing of your assets? This leads us to the concept of bloc competition, a term frequently used at Davos. The world is increasingly dividing into competing economic spheres, reminiscent of the Cold War, but with deeper economic interdependence complicating matters. We see the US and the EU attempting to strengthen their ties, pushing back against the Sino-Russian axis, and maneuvering for influence over swing states in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. These swing states are suddenly finding themselves in a position of power, being courted by rival superpowers. But they also face the daunting challenge of balancing their economic needs with political alignment. Their stability and growth prospects are now heavily dependent on the geopolitical wind direction. So, what's the takeaway for us, the viewers and investors? The biggest risk identified at Davos is volatility. Economic cycles used to be driven primarily by monetary policy and consumer demand. Now they are being increasingly driven by political decisions, military conflicts, and diplomatic breakdowns. This means investors need to factor in political risk far more heavily than ever before. We are moving into an era where geopolitical literacy is a mandatory requirement for economic survival. For businesses, the shift means prioritizing resilience over efficiency. The age of just-in-time inventory is being replaced by just-in-case inventory, increasing warehousing costs and requiring companies to hold larger buffers. They must diversify their manufacturing base, invest in cybersecurity against state-sponsored threats, and develop robust contingency plans for sudden regulatory shifts. This is expensive, but the cost of getting caught out, like having a major production facility suddenly locked down due to sanctions, is far greater. The final, perhaps most sobering message from Davos wasn't about immediate crisis, but about opportunity lost. The world faces massive collective action problems: climate change, future pandemics, global hunger. These require unprecedented international cooperation. But the fixation on great power rivalry is consuming the political oxygen and fiscal resources needed to address these existential threats. The real risk isn't just economic recession. It's a permanent reduction in our collective ability to solve the fundamental problems facing humanity. To navigate this new reality, we need to understand that economic news and foreign policy news are now inextricably linked. The warnings from Davos are clear. The golden age of seamless economic integration is over, and we must prepare for a more fractured, volatile, and politically charged global economy. If you found this breakdown valuable, please hit that like button, subscribe for more in-depth analysis, and ring the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.